Can you tell me about the houses you lived in? How many rooms there were and...
The different houses?
Yep.
I don't remember the earliest ones when they moved every fall, from one town back to the other. They were rented houses. First one I can remember is that little one that we had on the farm when they had the tornado. That was a real small little house. And then we moved into town, and we moved on, I think, on the west side of Devil's Lake. And I was so far from school, from that academy that I had to walk to, that I had landmarks all the way along, like the case dealer had those eagles out there to help me find my way home at night when school was out. Usually I went with Dad or someone to school in the morning, but I walked home because he didn't get home from work till later. And my sister was little. She'd often be sleeping. That was a big house, a nice big house. But then we moved to Grandma's, that apartment at Grandma's, and we lived there for quite a number of years. And then we did move to another house on a block or two away. That wasn't a real big house, but it was next door to the grocery store. And every time we'd have to run over to get a quart of milk, a penny bought candy in those days. You could get 2 malted milk balls or 2 or 3 pieces of candy. So we usually got an extra penny or 2 that we could run over. And if we were going somewhere, my dad would give us, a quarter, and we could go to that little store and get a sack full of candy. So when we went to visit the children, there was always some candy to take along as kind of a gift for the little kids to eat. Dad used to he was a Jewish man, and Dad in the evenings used to sit and visit with him a lot because his store was open after all the stores in town were closed. And he was really interesting about his faith, his church, the different customs between theirs and ours, how things were different for them, and customs that how they treat each other. Like they never will try to get the best of another one of their own faith. They're very, very good to each other. They said that you can call from here to New York. If it's somebody in that faith, they won't gyp you. You're going to get the best deal you can get. Different things about the way they do business, the way they, and they never had any arguments, my dad and this Ike Edelman. They were really good to visit with each other, and a nice neighbor to have next door. So, and then after that house, that's when we moved. In the summer, those years, my dad worked for the highway department, and he would go out either building highways. They built their own. They didn't hire construction companies. So in the summertime, we'd go out when he went out. He'd be like up at Rolla, building that highway up there. And once I remember we were down by Cheyenne for the summer while they built. And we had a camping trailer that we went with. And they hired 2 women to cook in a cook car for the crew. But he ate at home because we were there with him. And then during the day, we'd have the day off, the cooks, when they were done with their meals, and my mother and the 2 of us girls. So we used to go into the towns wherever we were working. And at night, we used to have fun playing because they had teams of horses on what they called a slip, which was like a pulled-up gravel. So the gravel pits would have all these nice, smooth little places, to run on, and you'd leave footprints, in the sand all over after work at night. But my sister never was healthy, so Dad would go and buy cream from the farmers where we were camping, and he'd buy Ovaltine and put that farm cream in the Ovaltine. And then at night, he'd bring it over to my sister before we went to sleep. And she didn't like it. She wouldn't drink it. So I drank it. And they couldn't figure out. I got fatter and fatter, and she got skinnier and skinnier. And they were pouring all this cream, they thought, into her they never realized that the minute he left the room, I drank the whole thing down. So in the fall, when we were downtown, she had gone to the doctor, and the doctor had said she should take cod liver oil pills. So she said to me, "Are you going to take my cod liver oil pills like you did the Ovaltine?" I said, "I don't know, I'll try one." So I reached in the box and bit one open. That was the end of the cod liver oil. That she had to take. I wasn't about to take that stuff, but I sure liked that Ovaltine with cream. That was really good. Get the cream all whipped up, and it was thick like a malted milk. She's supposed to get the good of the Ovaltine. They still sell Ovaltine. I hear it advertised on television. I always think of how much of that I drank as a kid when I didn't need it. I suppose if they'd put it with milk or water or whatever, I don't know what you're supposed to put it with milk, I think. It would have been okay. But he had to go overboard. He was really going to get some weight. She was going to grow. She didn't grow till she got ready to grow, I guess. But I enjoyed those summers because most of the small towns had swimming pools that we could go in during the day. Cheyenne had a dam where we used to go fishing. Dad and Mom and Bernadine and I had a tent that we used to go out by the dam, and he liked fishing. The rest of us didn't like fishing, but it was a chance to get away for a weekend, think something to do. And and then if we were close, I remember one time we went up to the San when it was still a sanitarium full of people with tuberculosis. And then they had later on they had children in there but at that time it was strictly, it was quarantined. You couldn't get into the rooms where they had the patients, but you could go through the rest of it, like the kitchens and how they had it set up. So that gave us something to do during the day, during the week, for something. Because there wasn't a lot when you were out, away from home. And the only good thing about it was that we were there at night when Dad got off work, and we were still in the morning, for breakfast. My mother, I think maybe, no, he came home at noon too, because those men ate their breakfast and went out to work, came in at noon and ate in the cook car, and then went out, and then they came back in the evening. It was just like they have a thrashing cruise with a big table in it and a stove. Probably a lot of times now they have more kerosene stoves or those gas stoves kind of to cook on rather than those cook cars, because that in the hot days in the summer it's too hot to bake with, especially. So and it's just one little room. I can't remember where those two cooks, they must have had a place to sleep in that at night too, because they stayed right in that cook car. They lived in that cook car all summer. I remember a couple of them were nice women. They were girls, two young sisters that cooked together. I suppose their early 20s. Were good cooks. But we were there. We used to visit back and forth. During the afternoons, if we didn't go somewhere, my mother and those girls would, just sit around and visit first part of the time. Because my mother couldn't wash clothes, and they didn't have laundromats, so she had to, on Saturdays, go back to Devil's Lake to get the laundry done to bring back for the next week. We always went home, like for Sunday. Dad worked Saturdays usually, but we could go home on Sunday, get the day off, go visit people. We did a lot of that. They don't do that much anymore, but then they just go visit, go to your some relative, or we went on picnics a lot. Devil's Lake had a lot of nice picnic grounds. Lakewood had at that time a nice beach, and every Sunday they had baseball games, softball or baseball, real baseball. And they have the church camp down there during the week for students, Bible camp, a big Bible camp. And they had a nice playground and had a museum. There were things for the youngsters to do. And every Sunday my mother said that if we had to be out in the country, at least we were going away on Sunday. We always either had company or we went to visit someone or went on a picnic with somebody, on a family. Sometimes we went to Wood Lake. Sometimes we went to Sully's Hill. Sometimes we went to Lakewood. And but we always found something to do, get away on a Sunday for entertainment, relief.
Did you go to church every Sunday?
Always, every Sunday. Yeah, we always went to church. If we didn't happen to be going into Devil's Lake, most of the time we went home for the weekend, and we went to our home church in Devil's Lake. We went to St. Joseph's. That's an old church in Devil's Lake. They still use it. Still being used.
Were your parents very religious?
Not overly. Mother never said much one way or the other. Dad would criticize, more so. He didn't like people who came to church and acted so religious and then got out of church and tried to see if they couldn't get the best of you some way financially. He always complained about that. People that he knew were not always honest, and then they'd come to church and act so pious, and that used to bother him. He couldn't see that. So, but yes, when we lived in town, my grandmother was very, very religious. His mother. She had her routine. She had a routine that she followed every day of her life, every week of her life. On Monday she washed clothes. Tuesday she ironed. Wednesday she had a chore that she did every day. Saturday she baked. Every Saturday she baked 2 pies and a cake. Every Saturday, whether she needed it or not. It was automatic. And usually it was chocolate cake with chocolate frosting. But she went to church religiously every morning. She got up and went to church before breakfast, came home, had her breakfast, and then on Sunday, of course, she went. If the 4th of July, I didn't care if it was the 4th of July or not, she washed clothes if it was Monday. Her laundry was on the line, had to be on the line. And if she didn't have enough to make a load in her washing machine, she'd take clean things and put them in there too to make the washing machine do a better job. Too few clothes, she thought, well, they don't get, it's just her and Grandpa. And Grandpa used to go out and stay on a farm in the summertime where he had his horses. So he didn't even come home every weekend, so she was pretty much alone in the summertime. Grandpa was not religious. He did not go to church very often, but Grandma was very religious. She gave my cousin a prayer book when he was in the Navy in World War II, and she was telling him, put that prayer book right here where your heart is. It had a steel cover, and if you get a bullet, it's going to deflect it. He said, Grandma, I haven't got time for the prayer book. If somebody's shooting at me, I'm going to be shooting right back. I haven't got time to worry about a prayer book. He used to tease her. He was mean to her. He always called her the Shanty Irish. She always said, oh no, her family were lace curtain Irish. They were not Shanty Irish. But he just did it just to get her goat and make her upset.
Can you tell me what church services were like when you were growing up?
Very similar to what they are today, except in our church it was a lot of Latin. And but otherwise it has not changed a lot, except we do more English now. Everything is English now. Everything is whatever country you're in, the language of that country. Where the old tradition, it was more Latin. And no matter where you went, what country, it was the same thing. If you became familiar with the Latin, wherever you went to, I was going to take Latin in high school, but in Devil's Lake, to take Latin, you had to take 2 years of it. They wouldn't let you take one. I could have taken 1 year when I was a senior, but I didn't. I took something else. And I could have taken Spanish that year, and I didn't take that either. I took, I don't know what I took, but I don't remember anymore. I took 2 years of typing, and I wasn't good at typing in first year typing. I don't know why I took the second, It was just a waste of my time because I'm the worst typist in the whole world. That's why I don't like computers, because I make more keyboard mistakes than, it's awful. But now, like the computers today, my grandson took, when he went to high school in Minot, took 3 or 4 years of French, and he was sitting and he took the English and wrote it in French, or the French and wrote it and said it in English, and his mother never said a word. He did the whole page, word by word, whatever his assignment was. And when she was through, she said, when he was through and had it all done, she said, you could have just punched the button on the computer and it would have translated the whole thing for you. You wouldn't have had to sit and figure out what every word of the thing meant. But he had done it the hard way. And then Cassie took German for a year or two, but she didn't take the whole 3 or 4 years of it. She just took a year or two. So that's the foreign language. But they were lucky in Minot. The foreign language students take a trip to Europe. And Jared's group went to Rome. They all went to Rome, but Jared's group started in Paris. They landed in Germany at Frankfurt there, and then took a bus down to Paris. They didn't spend any time in Germany at all. And the French in Paris were not friendly. He ordered a hamburger one time, and of course in a nice French restaurant. And when he went to eat it, it tasted funny. He turned it upside down. It was moldy on the bottom. She had deliberately given him that because he had ordered an American food. So when he was real good. When he'd call home and one of us answered the phone, he'd always, oh yeah, he really was learning a lot. Yeah, he really enjoyed the Louvre. Yes, he had enjoyed. But when Cassie was home alone one day, he said, well, he said, it's a bunch of sweaty people. He keeps saying, don't they have deodorant? Don't they have a razor? And he said, a bunch of sweaty people standing around here looking at a statue and sweating. That's about all he meant. But then they went to Spain and then to Rome. He liked Rome. He'd like to go back there. And Cassie went to Greece because the Olympics were there, and then to Rome. She got a chance to go to Rome. So they both have been there. I guess that's a pretty city. A lot of pretty things. They brought each one of us a rosary. Jared did. Cassie brought me the spoon rest that I have on the table. It's on the table from Rome. It says Roma or something on top that she brought for me. So I've never been to Europe. I'd like to go to Ireland. I've always thought I've heard that it's such a pretty country, but I don't think I won't even get back to Canada. I wanted to go to Canada. My dad wanted to take us. He went to Canada after my mom died with his 2 sisters, and one sister's husband. The other one was a widow, and they enjoyed it. They, met a lot of relatives they had never ever met. And then he wanted to do the same for my sister and I when he got back. My sister wouldn't go. She didn't want to go. And said when she wouldn't go, then neither one of us went. So I never had a chance to. I wish I had, because when I started getting the family book, he's going to fall off the chair. He's sleeping. I think I would have met a lot of people. I have no relatives here. Cousins now on mother's side. She had a big family, so there are a lot of cousins there. But there were only the 12 of us in all. They're all gone. So there's no family. And there's the name Brick isn't because my dad was the only boy that grew up. So that name is done here. So it would have been nice to go. Oh, maybe someday we'll still get up, drive up. I met a cousin from Wisconsin, from the other Brick family that came into Wisconsin. And he went through and went up to Canada to visit the relatives that live in Saskatoon. And now he had gone back to where their homestead was in Canada. And I thought, well, Joe and I could have gone along with him because he had gone so many times that he'd know where. And my grandmother's family, more of them live in Toronto, or Dad's family, I think more of them live in smaller places. But, the one that corresponded with him was at St. Catharines. It's 8 miles from Niagara Falls. So that would be something to go, be able to see Niagara Falls. Especially the Canadian side. That's a pretty side. I'm sure there are a lot of nice people, but I never will know who they are, which is too bad. Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I have just a few more about church. Did you do First Communion or confirmation classes or anything?
When I was little, and in most of the dioceses now, I received my first Holy Communion in 2nd grade, and then was confirmed when I was like in high school, and we went to, studied Bible studies until we were confirmed in high school. But this diocese of Fargo now has started doing the confirmation with the communion at 3rd grade. They don't make their first communion at 2nd grade anymore. They make it at 3rd grade, and they get confirmation, and a lot of the kids think we're done. They've done all the adult things. So I don't think it's going to work out. I think eventually they're going to go back. I think they need it. Now, my grandchildren live in the Bismarck Diocese in Minot, and I like theirs. They every fall they had a confirmation class in their when they were juniors in high school, and that bishop came in and gave them the best sermon. We had agnostics, we had Baptists. Kevin's family are all Baptists, strong Baptists, and Catholics, all religions, and they all said that was the best thing, because at that age there are so many temptations. At 3rd grade, what can you say to them? Yep. They haven't even begun to know what's going on. So I think we're losing, and a lot of people feel the same way. But it's going to take a while to turn it back. Now they've got it for all. They started moving them down a few grades a year. Now they've got it down, so they're all just 3rd graders, where they go through both things at one time. And it was 2 special days. The First Holy Communion was a real special family day. Confirmation was a real special family day.
How did you celebrate them?
How did I what?
How did you celebrate them when you were small? How did your family celebrate?
Like they did before here. At 2nd grade, the girls all wore white veils, white dresses, white shoes, and the boys dressed in shirts and ties, white shirts. And then they could wear colored pants and ties. And that was at 2nd grade, but it was a special day. Your parents and grandparents came, and then confirmation wasn't quite the emphasis that we have today on it, I don't think. But we still had dinner and invited out whoever of the family had come to church that day, and it was a special day. So that was 2 days in a child's life that are special with family days, like Christmas. That you do every year. My family have always had strong traditions for holidays, going together on holidays, exchanging and stuff. Joe's family he didn't grow up with that kind of tradition at all. But we've always, one would have Christmas, one would have Easter, one would have Thanksgiving, and we'd rotate and go to different homes on different days.
Can you tell me more about holidays when you were a child?
Well, those were the special ones. We always took, for the 4th of July, we always went on a picnic somewhere, like we did on Sundays. Whatever day of the week the 4th came on, it was a day off. Dad didn't have to work. And we'd go to one of those places. Everybody would put together a picnic dinner. That was mostly with his side of the family, though, with his 2 sisters, that we did that with. The church holidays like Easter and Christmas, they were church and family days, special days. And we always had a gift exchange, with family. And whether it was a bad year without a lot of crop or a good year, we always got a lot of things under the tree for Christmas. different things that, you know, like phonographs and tops, those big round tops, and sleigh or wagon or dolls, jump ropes, anything that we could play with, anything. Jack, when I was a kid, and I think more so when I taught in Minot, the kids used to play jacks a lot in the spring. That was one of the signs of spring. I don't think I see kids do that anymore. Everybody would be down on the ground, you know, with a circle and playing a game of jacks. But it's something a little different. But we also had dominoes, card games, all kinds of different board games, cardboard games, boxes of games that we got for Christmas. And hula hoops. Everybody had a hula hoop. So,
did you celebrate birthdays?
We always had a birthday party, birthday cake. And I always did it for my children, too, when they were little. And during the day, they'd invite all their classmates, friends, you know, children of our friends, for their birthday party. And I remember one time I'd bought a nice new ironing board, a real good, strong ironing board. And somebody said, well, they had used it for a bench to set things on. I thought that sounded good. And Cindy had a birthday party, and I didn't have a bench, so I used my ironing board. Worked out fine, but it broke the ironing board. It never, you know, it warped it kind of. It just never was a good ironing board anymore after that. So after that, I don't do that with my ironing board anymore. You could I've seen people take it for an extra table, cover it with a tablecloth and set things on it when they're having a party. That's fine, but don't let a bunch of children sit on it. It's too much weight. Just wrecked it.
Right. Can you tell me anything else about celebrations while you were growing up?
No, I don't think. When I was little, it was the days of the Chautauqua down at Lakewood. They still have the Chautauqua in the Devil's Lake area. During the summer, and usually over the 4th, they would invite a dignitary, like the president. President Roosevelt came, I remember, once to Devil's Lake. And, and the people who were senators and representatives in Congress would come and give speeches. And, you know, they made it a citywide celebration. They'd have a parade and ice cream stands and, you know, food stands all over town. And if it was close to an election or if not, you had a debate between the two parties, whoever they were. And they'd each speak on what they felt was good for the country. And we always went. They always took us. But I don't remember listening to the speeches or anything. I suppose my parents did, because they had other things going on for kids, foot races and sack races and relays, that kind of thing, you know, for entertainment. They used to come out to Lakewood. They had a lot of those over the 4th. They'd have what they called a Chautauqua out at Lakewood. It was kind of like a weekend of different rallies, a little bit political, just a little, you know, but it was a good time for everybody, a chance to get together. And they listened to somebody that they didn't have television. They didn't even know what they looked like until, except a picture in the paper. And we always had a daily paper, Devil's Lake Daily always, you know, and a weekly paper. We had the Devil's Lake World at that time. The World only came out one day a week, but it had ads in it and local news, like all the little communities around, who went where to visit and stuff, that kind of thing, like a weekly is now. And then the Devil's Lake paper had a society page, but that was more of the news of the day that went on. So we always got the paper in our home to read. And I still get the Minot Daily every day to read it. Because I taught in Minot, we lived in Minot. Joe worked for Sears, and we lived in Minot for the first several years we were married. And so I still see names, familiar names of people that I knew. And it does carry the news from all the small towns like Rugby in the paper. So that's why I get that particular one. I think maybe the Forum or maybe the Herald. The man that was the editor of the Herald used to be the editor of the Minot Daily for a long time, Jaleski. And then he went to Grand Forks, and I think that became a better paper than what it used to be. And he was very good, a good editor. I knew the editor of the Minot Daily. That was a Bill Johnson. That man was a walking encyclopedia and dictionary. I've never known another person like him. If you couldn't find a word, how to spell it, what it meant, just call him up. He could tell you what it meant. Or if anything, he just knew anything that was in an encyclopedia. He was just really, really an intelligent man. And he had a real good paper then. Now it's owned by a company in North Carolina on the East Coast. It's not locally owned at all anymore. And I could hand it to a fifth grader and they could start correcting. It's poorly written. It's not the paper it used to be. That's too bad. With the computers now, I mean, how much work is there to get a misspelled word corrected? So, and the local one in Rugby, we get the Rugby one, and we get the, we live in Benson County, so we get the Benson County paper too. But that one is privately owned in Benson County. And if the mail is late, he's on their case. This one comes out, the Rugby one is owned by the same company that owns the Minot Daily. It's owned way out of state. And if it's late, they don't. He doesn't do anything about it. He doesn't care, I don't think, as much as he could care. I think he tries to do a good job. It's just that it's insurmountable with the post office. They send it all. Used to sort the mail here and stamp at Knox. It's all sent now either to Devil's Lake or clear to Fargo and comes back. And that's what happens. If there's a holiday on Monday, chances are we won't get the paper till Tuesday or Wednesday, because all of the people that live in Knox have the same zip code, but all the people that get their mail out in the country, in a country route, goes to Rolette with a different zip code. So when they're sorting it, it's not a regular employee, if it's somebody else filling in, how do you know when you see a zip code whether it's town mail, and we have ours in a box in town, or if it's country mail? If it gets a paper up there, well, then it lays in Rolette till Monday or Tuesday, and they send it back until we get it, then it's Wednesday. Well, a new one's coming out Saturday. You don't need it anymore. So that's the way things are. When we came here, there were 2 local trains that went through. Every day, mail came on those trains. And then the Empire Builder went at night. They left mail in Rugby, and it would get down. But they had every time they went, you could go in and pick up your mail in the post office box, because she sorted it. As soon as the train went through, they'd bring the mail bag up, and she sorted it and put it in the boxes. Well, now you see it all goes on a truck after about 4 or 5 o'clock. Goes all the way east somewhere. And from Rugby on, I think it all goes into Minot to be sorted. So it's just kind of an overwhelming thing. But a lot of it's done with machines that used to be done with people. It's supposed to be faster, but when they have something going on in York and they're notifying the farmers, they have to notify us about a week in advance or we don't get it. It takes us 3 or 4 days to get a letter from York to Knox, 7 miles, or to Rugby even for that matter, because they ship it all east somewhere and then it comes back later on. So times have changed, and not always for the better. Some of those things were good. It gave a job to somebody on the train. It gave a job to the person in the office. Post office used to be open from 8 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning till 5:30. Now it's open from 8:30 to 10:30. If you don't get in and get your mail before 10:30, you can't get it till the next day. Oh, that's not all better. But a lot of people now do everything online. I still buy a lot of stamps and still mail. So I probably use it more than a lot of people probably don't notice it. If I'd switch over to the other, I probably wouldn't notice it either. I never have, so. Now what?
Well, kind of a couple of different questions for you. What language did you speak at home? Was it always English?
English, yeah. My ancestors in Canada, my mother's family, I think, spoke German, because that's one of the reasons I didn't go to see the grandparents often. They spoke German, and I didn't speak German. So it was difficult to communicate with them. Later in life, they got better at speaking English. But the Canadians spoke the English before they came here. Other than that, instead of saying yes, or Germans will say gell, if they're asking you a question, gell. The Irish Canadians will say, what is it? It was just on the tip of my tongue. Grandpa used to say it all the time. A. If they question A, you're supposed to answer yes or no. I suppose it's from I and nay, but it was A. And I still hear, when I hear Canadian radio stations, they still say that. They use that word, A. And they pronounce some words different, laboratory or laboratory. There's a few differences, in the pronunciation. And their spelling is a little different. I noticed that too in Australia. They use the Old English spelling a lot, like tire, T-Y-R-E, instead of tire, T-I-R-E. Yeah. So, but it was English, always English.
Was there ever any tensions in any of the places where you lived between people of different ethnicities?
Yes, I grew up out Grand Harbor, and then we moved to another farm south of Grand Harbor. That one had a great big house on it with 2 of everything, 2 living rooms, and it had a big old kitchen, and that had a backside stairway going upstairs to carry up and down. We just rented that for a couple years before my dad bought the farm he did. That was a Norwegian community. We just had a ball out there, because when the lake froze over in the wintertime, we'd take pickups down on the lake and skate behind the pickups or ski behind the pickups. And they always got together. That community was so much fun. In the fall of the year, you never picked your potatoes. You never went out and picked your potatoes. They'd take a day, they'd go to the first farmhouse and have coffee, and everybody got out, picked all the potatoes. And then they'd get in the cars, drive to the next farm, pick their potatoes, have lunch. Then they'd drive to the next farm, pick the potatoes, and have coffee. Then they'd go to the last farm, pick the potatoes, and have supper. So they made a day of just going from place to place to place. And everybody got their potatoes picked the same day. They did everything together. They were kind of related, a lot of them. But they always included us. We, in everything they did, we were part of the group. But, and then they asked me one time, can you speak Catholic? Because they could speak Norwegian. They didn't realize this was not the same thing. It was entirely something different. There is no such thing as a Catholic vocabulary that I know of. But that was really a fun community. We really enjoyed it. And, they'd always get together for all of the holidays. The kids would get together, like Halloween and things like that. Did things as a group.
What did you do for Halloween?
They, about like they do today, dressed up and went. Sometimes it wasn't good. They'd come in the yard, and sometimes if the dog, I remember once we had a nice dog, And they drove in the yard and the dog wouldn't let them out. They came back in the yard and shot the dog right in front of the door. So that wasn't a good thing. And they often, would have, if there were outhouses, go tip them over, that kind of thing. But they never did any real damage to buildings. But it was a bunch of boys that came in. It wasn't my friends. I didn't know who they were that came in the yard. And I don't know what they were going to do, just maybe get a treat, My mother always had something that she gave them, candy or cupcakes or apples or, something like that. Maybe that's what they wanted when they couldn't get out of the car. I'm sure I know the parents would never have gone with it, and they were very upset the next day because a farm dog is a part of the family. They're needed, for cattle and sheep. So it's not an easy thing for anyone to find that happen. But I'm sure they had some guilty consciences when they thought about it later on. It would be not nice to think of doing it to someone. But other than that, that was a good community. That was a fun group because there were a lot of young children. Every family had children our age, and a little older or younger. But we always got together. They did that in the summer, too, for different things. They went Juneberry picking. We all went Juneberry picking and then got together to do something together.
Did you make jams and syrups?
My mother usually canned a lot of them, and then she could make pies out of them. She could thicken the canned ones. But we always got poison ivy. We used to go Juneberry picking down where it's Camp Grafton, where the National Guard meet. And she used to just drive by and could get, because you can get it just with the dust in the air or someone's gloves if they touch you that have handled it. And she was really susceptible to it, so we always ended up with a case of poison ivy from it. The Juneberries were good, but poison ivy wasn't much fun. I like Juneberries with cream on them. Just plain. And on ice cream. We used to do a lot of ice cream, too, in the winter time. We'd get together and make ice cream, homemade ice cream.
How did you do that?
How?
Yeah.
Oh, my mother would make a custard, kind of, with milk and eggs and thicken it like you do a custard. And then put it in the gallon can and add cream. We had farm cream and cream. The sugar went in the custard, the sugar and the milk and the cream. No, you just added the cream at the end. The sugar, the milk, and the eggs and some flour or cornstarch to make quite a thick custard. And then when you put it in the can, you added the cream and a flavoring, maple nut or chocolate or strawberries if you had them. And we didn't have the freezers we have today, but they all had lockers. When you took your cream into the creamery, they also had the locker plant right there. And when we butchered the animals, they'd put them into that locker plant. And so you always had to stop when you got the cream, you took the cream, pick up your meat, take it home. You could only take home for a couple days because you couldn't keep it frozen again till they all got electricity. Then you could do that. So everybody right away bought refrigerators and freezers to have. That was the greatest thing that's happened to the rural states. Electricity.
Do you remember when you got it?
Yeah, I remember when my folks got it. Yeah. Well, we lived here for part of a year before we had it here too. The place was standing empty, and it didn't come in, no electricity. So when we came, we could have gotten it Otter Tail from over here, and that man wouldn't let us cross his pasture. We'd had to put a pole in his pasture. So we had to wait. We could have gotten it from those neighbors up there. They would have let it come down, but we had to pay for the poles. and they were like $800 a pole, and then they belonged to them when they got through. We didn't have that kind of money. So we had to wait, and the REA came in from the other direction then. Yeah, and then we put in electric lights in the house, in the barn. And I remember thinking, oh, I'll never use $7 worth of electricity. Then I bought a freezer, and you kept on buying because you, and now I'm so lucky when it's 150 or less, very rarely less. Usually, you know, the light bill every month runs about 155 or more. $7 seems like nothing anymore. We had the telephone when we came here. That was in the house. And one year when we didn't have a very good crop, I said to Joe, you know, we could do without paying that $7 for the, we had a party line. You could hear everybody's calls. And I said, you know, we really could do without it. And Joe and I went to rugby on an errand. That's after we moved the house down here off the hill. And the girls were home. And Jolene looked out the window, and there was a fire where the pit, where the house had been, the old cellar. They had thrown in all the timbers from moving the house and lit them in the fall. And it should have been burned out by spring. This was in the middle of the summer. All of a sudden, those embers came to life and started going. They were going for the barn, coming down the hill. So she looked out and saw it. She called the fire department town, changed her jeans because they had a hole in them. And now you buy them with holes in them. Changed her jeans and had on good jeans when the fire truck got out there. So we decided we would never take the telephone out because otherwise we'd have been putting a barn fire. Without a barn, would have been. So it was a good thing that the kids had it to make the call. I don't know how you'd do without it now anyway. You'd never think of taking that out. Unless now the cell phones get directories, and eventually maybe you won't need the landlines anymore. I still use the landline a lot. Joe uses it all the time. That's his entertainment during the day. And way of exchanging work things, schedules. If you need to buy something, you can find out if they have it. So you use it a lot, I guess, on a farm.
How else did things change for you when you were a child and you got electricity? Your parents did.
What else did they what?
What else changed for your life when your parents got electricity?
Well, I think everything did, because you had to get up and light a lantern to go to the barn. Now you could just turn on a switch. And eventually then it meant water pumped into the house, because you have to have electricity for that. So, and those two things are just about everything. If you don't have one or the other, you notice, that it's missing. And it meant then we had... when we lived in town, we had an electric radio, an electric washing machine, and most of those things, and we couldn't use them till they came and hooked up the folks, and then they all of those things went back into use, and the lights and the lamps and all that went out of use. Don't have any use for them anymore. Now they're antiques. Now there's something to sit around and look at, No, I think that the best thing that ever happened to the rural areas of the state, to have that. Like Joe's folks had put in their own plant, but you had to charge up those batteries, and you had to make sure they didn't leak. They had them down in the basement. And so they were real happy too, even though they had their own plant. They had their own running water system, that when they got the electricity, that they could just change their pumps over and everything was done automatically. No chores to taking care of every day. And then they had in their basement, they had a little room and had one wall of batteries. So when they could take those out, then they could make that room into something else, used for something else in the basement. So it made it nice that way too. No, it's been a lot of good things have happened from that.
Going back a little bit, do you remember the Dirty 30s?
Only slightly. My dad worked. My dad had a job, and I remember the farm families coming into town, mother's friends coming to visit, and oh, they were so destitute. You know, they got so little for their cream, they got so little for their eggs, and I remember too myself when I went out to the farm, out to dailies to the farm. I always wondered, well, how do they live? Their dad doesn't go to work every day and bring home a check. You know, what do they live on? And then I realized, well, that grain they had in the granaries was something they sold, and then that, you know, that was what took care of all the other expenses. But I remember that day that the tornado hit. That was just before the 30s. I wasn't home. My mother and my little sister were home, and one of my cousins was there. But she said that it brought the granary up the hill. The house was kind of on a little knoll, and just was ready to smash it into the house. And then the wind switched and it took it off in a different direction. The whole building went. And they had lived in a bigger house when they lived in town. They had a lot of furniture stored in that granary, like her dining room set, all of those things like that. And some of that furniture was destroyed. Said they lost some of it. My dad was out cutting roads with a horse mower, and when he saw it hit, he knew that that place had gotten hit. So he hurried home, but it was all done when he got there. The barn had been damaged. That granary was gone completely. The house didn't get me damaged, so. But I was at my uncle's, and they got hail, and I remember watching out the window, and he said, would you like me to go out and bring in some hail? So he went out with a pan and picked up the hail and brought it in. I didn't realize his year's income was going down the drain with that hail. I just thought, oh, isn't this neat? He brought in these hailstones. They're like ice balls, you know, that we could handle them and realize what they were. But the 30s were very difficult for farmers. It was a difficult time. My dad used to walk the floor many nights afraid he'd lose his job, but he didn't, not from depression. He never did. Later on, he quit working for the highway and went back farming, but that was when he wanted to go do it.
Do you remember anything else about that time?
No, I remembered that some of the children came to school with different kinds of jeans, overalls. And it soon learned from listening to adults that they were government issued. They each got so many pair of overalls, and they were issued oranges, different kinds of fruit, that there had been a surplus in one place, and they had distributed that in different places. But we never qualified for anything like that. So in my home, I guess I didn't experience. My dad didn't get a lot of money, but he was working and brought home a paycheck, and that a lot of people would have been happy to have that. And we had one friend, my folks that were friends to one family. They had two little girls too. They were a little younger than we were. And he walked to work every day for $1 a day. So at the end of the month, all he got was $30 a month. And they had to pay rent. They moved into town. They had to pay rent out of that $30, food for the children, clothing. She too, I think, like my mother, did a lot of her own sewing. Yeah. That's where we used to go at night when visiting. They were real good friends. We'd all walk over to their house. And when my dad would give us those little tiny sacks, he'd maybe give me a dime or 20 cents. I'd go over and buy candy, and I'd have that little sack full of candy and take it over to those children at that house. But they managed. They got by. They lived through it. Wasn't easy. Nothing ever is. I hope we never have to go through that again. I don't know if today if we'd be able to handle it. They never had a lot of things, those families. And now if we had to go back to that, it would be very difficult. There'd be a lot of suicides, I'm sure. People who would be just desperate. I don't know that there were in those days. I never have read any kind of a report on it. If people committed suicide from the depression they had in their bodies, from the depression they were suffering in their lives. Because like that, my uncle that lost his crop to hail, he had a good crop, but he lost a lot of it. He didn't lose it all because he had enough land that there were some places that didn't get hit. But there were a lot of them that dried out shortly afterwards, and didn't get anything. Well, the first year my dad went farming, he didn't have much of a crop. That's why I had to drive the binder for him. But then the next couple years, he had real good crops. So it kind of made it up, but it's tough to get started. He was just starting out. He had taken his savings to buy tractor and equipment. And then that next fall, he didn't hardly have anything to pay expenses for another year. But we lived on a dairy farm, and we did have the milk to sell. And that made a difference too, because there were a lot of families in town that bought milk, bottled milk. So that was, I think, probably easier for us than if a person who was more dependent on the grain lost the crop. And at Devil's Lake, we never had any trouble getting enough hay. We always had enough rain at the farm, and they always had some kind of a crop. Like Joe and out here further west, they didn't have that. They fed their cows thistles, cut thistles that grew, and that's what they fed the cattle. We never had that. And that's why a lot of them from here moved to the Devil's Lake area. A lot of families went further east. The land isn't as expensive as in the valley, but it's good land, a lot of it there.
Can you tell me what you remember about the war?
Well, I was in high school when it started, and a lot of the boys from school, a lot of the seniors, were in the Guard. Some of them as a way of picking up extra money. And so in the middle of the year, a lot of them left for camps. They didn't. I think the school gave them their diploma by maybe correspondence or something. But there were a lot of the class left to go to service. And then that fall I left for college. We lived in the dorms, everybody. But of the college kids, they were predominantly girls, because the boys, a lot of them were in service. A lot of the men were in service. And there were a few. There were some that were married already and back getting their degrees. And they didn't have to go. They didn't draft them if they were married and had families. And most of them, though, before the year was out at college, most of them had been called, and they were gone. And then I lived in the dorm that year, and that by spring, they moved in 1,500 Air Force boys, men. And we had, when I went to school in the girls' dorm, we had Murphy beds. You could leave them down, or you could roll them up and put them in the closet and shut the door, so you had the whole room. You didn't have a bed standing all the time. Well, when the Navy came in, they took all those Murphy beds out because they put 3 men in a room where we had 2. Our rooms, each one had its own sink, but we had to use a community bathroom for showers and the stool part. But the men, they put in twice as many as they had with women in that dormitory. So, and then they put up the obstacle course, and we had to take Phi-Ed, so many hours of Phi-Ed. And so what we ended up doing is running that obstacle course that they had for men, which was not too easy for women to get over. Now I know they have a lot of girls in service. They must have a more physical work activities until they get in the service, because that would be really demanding to get through that thing. But They had those soldiers, Air Force, and no, were they Navy? They were 1,500 Navy guys, I believe. It was Navy, not Air Force. Or maybe there are, well, I don't know. But anyhow, they moved them in. And then there were some other branches of service that used the college for classes that they were taking. So a couple of the boys from Devil's Lake were also in that group that were stationed there. They were in the. And when we went to war with that war, they started rationing right away. You couldn't go in and buy sugar. You couldn't buy shoes. You couldn't buy hose, pantyhose. You couldn't get those at all. Rubber tires. You could only have so many tires. You could only buy so many gallons of gasoline. All of those things were rationed, and so you knew we were at war. Butter. We couldn't get butter. I remember we learned to take a pound of butter, and I can remember taking it home. We had moved into housing with kitchen privileges, and you'd take it home. You'd add, I think it was a cup of milk into that pound of butter, get kind of room temperature, and then whip it up. And it was like these little tubs of butter that you buy today, that whipped up butter. All that is butter or margarine whipped up with some milk in it. And then it's softer, it's easier, and goes twice as far. But you could get more mileage out of a pound of butter that way. And if you were going to can, you didn't get much sugar. So that was difficult, you know, for people. And the tires weren't good tires. They were made out of reused rubber. Shoes were made out of imitation stuff with almost like paper soles. They didn't wear very well at all. They weren't very much good. But that's all you could get, so you took it. You know. So. But right from the start, everybody was helping with the war effort because you had to. It was part of it, you know. So I didn't have to go. It was no conscription for girls, just for men. But I was lucky there. And then when they started coming home, some of those men were coming back, and they had, you know, been shot and damaged with all the noise, or you know, a lot of problems, physical problems. So a lot of them suffered for a long time. We had a shell shock from World War I. Lived right about a mile away from us. And I felt so sorry for the man. He really tried to live a normal life. And now some of them are shell shocked again, they're saying. But he would tell tall tales, and he really believed it happened. I remember there was a train wreck right by my parents' farm, and he went to town the next day and was telling the people, or a few days later, was telling the people how after that train wreck, his chickens laid cracked eggs for a week. And you know, you had to stand there and not laugh because he was hurt if you laughed. And he was telling them how his sons, he had two sons about the same age as my sister and I, and one of them was going to catch a turkey, and it flew up over the windmill, and the kid just hung on to it, went over the windmill with the turkey. You know, it's pathetic to have to live your whole life and have your mind that damaged. He was a good man. He was a real good neighbor, very helpful, but he was difficult to deal with because he just didn't have it to deal with. So it's a tough war. It can be, you know, bad for people that come through it, you know. So, and then the paper every day would have the casualties. You always worried about who was on the list. It wasn't like now that you heard it on television first, you know, and then you had to wait and get the paper. In some communities, they'd have a list outside of a building and list the names, and people would go every day and watch to see whose name was on the list, who had gotten killed. And there was a lot of casualties in that war, too. A lot of people were killed. Young men. And they took them up to 35, so, I mean, they weren't older people, but they still weren't young kids. They were older adults. But everybody wanted to win it, So the only thing they could do was to help, do what they could. People didn't take vacations much because you couldn't get the gasoline to get there. So their life was work. And a lot of the girls then that I had gone to high school with that didn't go to college went out west and worked in factories. And that's when the women started working outside the home more, because they all got work out there to help one way or another. So, but when I went to college, I was the youngest freshman on campus, and my roommate was the oldest. I was 17, she was 21. And they put us together. I don't know why. But it's a strange thing. We looked something alike. People used to get us mixed up. But I didn't know her before. She lived way up by the border. And even though I was younger, I wasn't afraid to go downtown or walk, around town. She wouldn't leave the dormitory for, I think, several weeks. She would not walk downtown. She was afraid she'd get lost and wouldn't find her way back home. So it was kind of a strange mix-up. She didn't remain in teaching very long. We roomed together, I think, the first two quarters, and then her sister came to go to school. She was very musical, but she couldn't read a note. She could not, when we had to take Music 101, she could not understand the time, just could not get that. But she could take any music that they were playing on the radio, sit down and just play it. So when we went out student teaching, we went out together, the two of us. And we did our student teaching in Surrey. And we roomed together. We had a little light housekeeping room, they called it, where you could cook. Of course, we didn't cook. We bought bottles of catsup and loaf of bread, and we'd put catsup on the bread, and that's what we ate half the time. And then when we go up to the school to run off work, I did all of hers. She sat and played the piano, but I'd rather run off the worksheets because I couldn't play a note. I didn't know a note. But my uncle, Harold, had a violin, and I took the violin back to school with me and took violin lessons. She took that violin and could play it, and it didn't have a sound post. The sound post was broken. Before I could take lessons on it, they had to fix the inside, put the sound post back in. She could make music. She could pick up any instrument, that whole family. They had a family band. They played 4 or 5 instruments, everybody in the family, all by ear. Nobody had taken a lesson. And then when we the last day of school, we always had to write lesson plans for the next set of student teachers that were coming. You had to write 3 sets of lesson plans for 3 days. And our teacher at the college had told us to word our goal, in a certain way. And it was the first grade teacher at Surrey asked me after I was there for a while, don't word them that way, word them this way. So I started writing them the way she wanted them written. So when I got to the final ones, I did it the same way as we'd been doing it. And when the supervisor from the college came, she sat and went over those lesson plans. And she said, these are worded wrong. They should be worded this way. And we were in that teacher's room, and I looked up, and all she would have had to say is, I wanted them. This is my classroom. I want them written that way. She just kept looking at me. She was a real strange. She'd never, ever married. And I've talked to people that lived in Surrey. She was just real different. She never said a word. And so the supervising teacher said, you'll have to do them all over again. So I stayed. She told the same thing to my roommate. And my roommate left, walked home, got our stuff packed up. By the time I got done at the school, the college car was coming to pick us up. I walked in the house. She was all packed. She was playing the piano downstairs. She said, there's no reason for you going up to pack. She said, I've got everything all packed. Everything's packed up. I said, did you clean the room? Yes, I cleaned the room. Everything's done. I said, didn't you have to do your lesson plans over? No, she said. I sat and looked at it, and all I could think is, you look just like a mouse. And I didn't write them over again. She said, I don't care if they don't want to use them the way they're written. They're written. So we got back to the college. I never asked her any questions on what she had done. When it came time for finding jobs, and we had to go to the supervising teacher, she said to me, why did you sweep the dirt under the linoleum in that room? I said, I never swept any dirt anywhere. I didn't get a chance. I didn't even have to do it. It was all done, but I didn't tell her who did it. I said, I didn't do any. I didn't ever lift the linoleum and sweep the dirt under it. I might not sweep the floor, but I'm not sweeping the dirt under the linoleum. And, well, that's what the landlady said. The landlady said somebody had swept the dirt under the linoleum. And I never did ask her, but I'll bet a nickel. Out of spite, she just lifted it and swept under there and thought, nobody's going to know the difference. And of course, by that time, we were rooming together, so I didn't get a chance to visit with her very much. So I never did. But when we went out teaching, she didn't even last her first year. When the 1,500 sailors came into town, she was a busy girl. She was gone every night. She wasn't studying. She wasn't doing getting any good out of her education at all. So that was my experience with the war.
Well, then, how old were you when you started dating?
Oh, I was teaching before I started dating. Yeah. I didn't go into dating in high school, and I didn't much in college. They were all girls. I mean, there were few husbands, and it was a different college life because we'd have sock dances because it was just all girls. The campus was just full of, the regular students were all women. So I think I was out teaching when I started dating, any serious dating. We'd go in groups, lots of kids in a group, but I never did anything serious.
When did you meet your husband?
That's where I met Joe when I went to my first job of teaching. I went to Berwick to teach, and I met him there, him and his brother, and my roommate and I, and we ended up marrying brothers, and we're sister-in-laws. It was nice. I had gotten along well with her when we were roommates. The first year I went to teach in Berwick, I had a strange experience. I remember my mother bought me a whole new outfit to go up. I had gotten the contract. I knew I was going to teach there. And I went up on the train. And I could go on the train that was going on to Minot, and then it turned around and came back. And so I could go to Berwick for an hour or two, get off, and find my room, place to stay, and live, and check things out, and get back on the train. And she had bought me a nice brown-colored suit, skirt, a jacket, blazer. And I got all dressed up to go looking for a room. Today, you'd never do that. But I got all dressed up, went up on the train, got off at the depot, and the depot agent was drunk. And he scared me half to death. I didn't want to get back on the train. When it came time to go on the train, well, then I walked from that drunken depot agent over to this house. They said, well, this woman took in room and boarders, and usually the teachers lived there. So I went to her house, and she had a dust cap on her head. She was house cleaning, and I had never seen a woman during the day walking around with a dust cap on their head. She was really, a fussy person. But I came, and she was real nice. She was a real nice lady. And I visited with her, and she showed me the room. And I would have a roommate. Another teacher was coming to live there. And that was the one that became my sister-in-law. She had taught 7 years. She had taught in a country school by her home during the war when things were tough for farmers, and took her paycheck and gave it to her parents, more or less, to support their family until times got better for them, and then they paid her back. She got it back, but she had done that for 7 years, and then she came to Berwick. By that time, then they were okay. Things had turned around. Farming was getting good again. So So we lived together in that room. The first year, that lady cooked for us, all our meals. She packed our lunch at noon because we had to take our lunch to school. And it wasn't very far, a couple blocks away. But we ate the morning and evening meal with them in their home. They were just like, well, they had had 3 daughters. And we came in, it was just like having their daughters back again. So, and they had a nice bathroom upstairs in that house, you know. That had been, when they built the house, it was a nice home. It's now been moved to Rugby. I go by it every once in a while. It had such beautiful oak, fancy woodwork all over the house. And the upstairs had really huge closets. The room we had was a great big room, about this size. And then it had a big closet on each end, a big walk-in, the full length of the room, closet, you know, to put your stuff, the things away. It was a nice place. And they were so good to us. They tried to teach us how to play tennis. Neither one of us knew how to play tennis. And they just took us in as family. And then if I couldn't get in, I didn't have a church. Both of us were Catholic. And we didn't have a church in Berwick. Somebody had to give us a ride. And we didn't have cars, either one of us. We went by public transportation. Her folks would come and get her because she lived right south of here. But I went back and forth on the train. But Mrs. Offit, the house lady where we were, I'd go with her to her church. She went to, as small as Berwick was, they had about 2 blocks long. They had two Lutheran churches, completely different ministers, and completely different. I think today it's probably the traditional and the modern. That's kind of what that was. She went to the one on the south side of town, and that only had like 2 or 3 families, and they were all related. And then the one on the north end of town, all the farmers up north were Norwegians. That was a whole. The Germans lived south of the road, and the Norwegians lived north of the highway. There was a whole colony of them up there. I suppose that's the way it had been settled years ago, and. But the children all got along in the school. They all went to the same school. They have the most fun at their reunions. They started out with 10-year reunions, and of course I was a teacher, Joe was a student, so we get invited, you know, always to go to the, and we just look forward to that. We have more fun. They'll have it all in one day or a day and a half. They have it on a Saturday afternoon, visiting, and then a banquet. And then they get up and tell all kinds of funny stories of things that went on, and some of them that are musical, entertain. And then they just get together afterwards. And Sunday they get together and have a picnic at the Eagles and hire a cook who makes a whole dinner. Nobody has to bring anything. And sit around and visit and do some more singing and joke telling, and then everybody heads out for wherever they're going. So you get to see people you haven't seen for years, you know. And they used to do it every 10 years. Now they've got every 5 because so many of them are dying off. And yet they get a big turnout in that little school, but it was like a family kind of thing. And it's really, really a nice thing. They do it every 5 years, get together. Now, I've gone to my class reunions and they're no fun, you know. And then they had an all-school reunion. I wouldn't even go to that. I thought, my word. They used to graduate from 100 to 150 kids a year, and they started the school in the 1800s. How many graduates would you be? Would you ever find anybody? Well, my sister went the first day, and she said it was horrible. Oh, it was awful. But the second day they went back, then they started in classes of a decade in each of these different groups. And then you started meeting people that you had gone to school with, you know, not people that had been there for years and years and you didn't know. But I couldn't see it. I can't even imagine bringing that many people into Devil's Lake. It's a small town. Getting all those people coming from all over the country for a class reunion. So I used to go to all of mine. I haven't gone now. We haven't had one now for a while, but I used to go. And the best one we had, Joe and I went to that class reunion. That was the last one. It was 50 years. And they had it at the Elks. So we went down early, and he was sitting there, wasn't thinking, you know, and all these older people kept coming in. Pretty soon he said, "What are all these old people doing here?" I said, "They're here for a 50th reunion, the same as we are." What do you expect, young people walking into a 50th class reunion? But he said, "That's the best one I've had." When they get to the 50 years, they don't brag anymore. Up until that time, "Oh, I have this job, I'm driving a big motor home, and I vacation in Bermuda," and all that stuff. And you just kind of, By the 50th, they were all retired and all having a good time, and they didn't care who had done what or how much money you had or anything like that. It was just a good time for everybody. So I thought, well, that's good to look forward to if you haven't already done so. But I never have gone back to the homecoming at the college because I only went one solid year, and then I went umpteen summers till I finished it all. And you don't feel like part of the group. The other people went on and finished, or the whole big bunch that went out teaching. A lot of them never did graduate. They never came back and graduated. But the girl that I taught with, my roommate, when I taught in Minot, she went back later, much later. Her children were grown and all went to Concordia. All three of her children went to Concordia for school. And then she came back to Minot. And they had more or less retired real young. They used to go to Texas every winter. They'd leave in the fall and come back in the spring. They farmed out, they had their cattle out on shares. Somebody else was renting their land, and they just went, And then she decided, well, she went on to sub down in Texas too. And she went back and got her degree, and they were living in Pioneer Hall for married couples. And her husband then audited. He used to go every day to the business classes, just sat in. He didn't take the class or get credit for it. He just sat in and learned what he could learn. And he was especially interested in investing money, how to invest money. So he sat into all these classes till she had graduated. She had inherited a land near Rendell, Minnesota. Her name was Rendell. So it was named for her family name. She had land there, that's expensive land. And she had land out by partial she had inherited. So he didn't like the fellow that was renting the land in Rendell. Kept saying, he's gypping you. So she finally sold it. Well, then she had to invest it in something. He invested in the stock market. He thought he knew what he was doing on the stock market. And she invested, their daughter was married to a minister, a Norwegian Lutheran minister in Texas. He came up here and went to school too. That's where she met him. And so they had a parish down in Texas. That's one of the reasons why they went down there every winter. But when they came the last time, he started telling Joe how he had invested that money and he lost it all. When that stock market crashed, he lost it all, and he was so bitter about it because now all that money he had, or she had, or actually, she never ever mentioned it. She never ever said anything about it, except that they had bought a home for the daughter and the minister she was married to. So they'd get equity in a house. If you always live in a parsonage, when you retire, you don't have equity in a house. This way they had their own home and started the equity. So eventually when they retire, they'll already have their own home. So, and of course in a warm climate, why they wouldn't go anywhere anyway, else. They got married here and went down there. They've been down there all these years. So I knew what the No Child Left Behind was like in Texas. Some of my students had gone down to Texas. And when they came back, that is the worst mess, they'd say. I can hardly wait to get out of it. They couldn't find a job in North Dakota. That's why they were down there. And June said the same thing. She subbed most of the time, but she said, half of the class doesn't speak English, the other half doesn't speak Spanish. So you say it once in language and then repeat it. Well, what do you get done in a day? A half a day's work. Repeating everything for everybody. So now she's living in Mankato. They've converted their old main building into apartments for senior citizens. And they moved into them. They made them just beautiful. And they have their meals with white linen tablecloths. And they also use that room for college functions yet at Mankato State. And she goes out every day. She and a teacher from Rock Lake, that's living in the same building, and work with these little Mexican kids, trying to get them to learn their English, and the older ones too that don't speak English. So she feels real good about that. But she said, oh, Texas was a mess. And then that was the model the whole country was supposed to follow. I said to Joe, oh, I hope he doesn't get elected. He can't, he'll mess up the schools. The schools were doing all right. We always scored well. Up here, all this, the northern states did well on tests. Well, he got in, and now they've got all that testing, and now the teachers are retiring. This spring, the teachers in Rugby that retired, they asked them questions. And when you're teaching and you're under contract, you're beholden to the district. You don't dare say anything. They were done. They were retired. And boy, did they come out with the truth in the paper. He said, all you're doing is teaching for the test. You're not teaching the children how to think. You're not preparing them for the future just to pass that stupid test. And then they don't get the test checked. Some of them weren't checked when school was out. So what good does it do you? We used to test. We always, every year, the children took tests. And then you went over, did they grow from last year? Where do they need help? We used it as a tool, not just to take a test. I said to Joel what had happened. The test companies are going to love this. They're going to get rich. And that's just what's happened. So now I don't know. Some parts of it are going to be good, but there are a lot of parts of it that... And then, it's not fair. The reservation schools in the state couldn't make it because they've never been pushed up. Number one, they know that if you've got, 1/16 of Indian blood, you're not going to have to get out and work. You're going to get your paycheck. And they know that. They know that from little. If you have a number and are inscribed with the tribe, you're going to be taken care of, all your health care. They don't have to worry. Well, so they never, they were kind of laid back. Both my friends that went to teaching up in Belcourt and the ones that teach down at Fort Totten, it's the same thing. They'll go out and round them up and get them to school one day, and the next day another bunch disappear. They never have. And they never even bother to put last names on any of the records because they don't really have a last name. If they do, it's the mother's name. They all follow the mother's matriarchal kind of plan. And so when they gave that first test, one of the Devils Lake schools just went kaplunk, and Devils Lake's always had a good school system. Why did Sweetwater go down? Other two schools are doing fine. What they did is, when they put in the law that you can choose which school district you want to send your children to, some of the reservation people wanted to send them to Devils Lake to school. So they were so the Devils Lake district went out with a bus and brought them in, close to school, Minnie H. dropped them off. They brought the score down for the whole school. So they had to do some scrambling. You can't do that anymore. But for the next year, they had to divide them up, move them all over in order to get their scores back up, or else you get on that list of schools that are not keeping up, and then they fire your principal like it's his fault. None of it makes much sense. I hope it gets correct. The good things are fine, that they should keep. And I think when you start planning, you better include some educators. Congress is not a bunch of educators. You have to ask somebody in New York City. And what New York needs and what North Dakota needs are not always the same. It's got to be state controlled. I think keep it local, where people can, if you're satisfied, fine. If you're not satisfied, then do something. But it's up to them to do it. They used to say in a lot of our education classes that you can judge a town or a city by their schools. A progressive, interested town, you're going to have a nice school. One that's where you go there and the school's run down, forget it. That town isn't going to care about anything. And it's pretty much true. And North Dakota and Minnesota are, Iowa always tests high on the kids testing high. And I've watched here, just for fun now that I'm retired, we have the school in Rugby. We live in the Rugby district. And there's a school at Leeds. And Rugby's the biggest. Leeds is next. Wolford up here is the smallest. When they get the test scores come out, Wolford's way up. Leeds is next. Rugby's at the bottom. because they've got kids coming in from all over. You know, they just can't. Wolford, there's so few kids. They've all had the same education. And you get a class with 2 kids in it. You don't need remedial reading. They're going to get it right now before they ever get started. And then it shows, it comes through with the test. And they win all the awards. They were the school of the year here a couple years ago. The state superintendent came up and gave them a big award. They hung up in their gym, and their teachers are all getting awards, you know, wherever they go. But their teachers are dedicated faculty. You know, they're part of the system, like the one that's going to Minot State now. That woman has done everything for those schools. She just, you know, then they went down, they won the state school award. They went to Bismarck. And when they got this award, they were so proud of it. The teachers, several of the teachers were down there. They went to see their representative, who lives right out of Wolford, has 2 boys in school. And they showed him, and they were beaming from ear to ear. They had gotten this big award. And he stood there and looked at me. He said, "I want you to know I want that school closed." And they all stood there just like, oh. Well, you know, they know it's going to be closed eventually, but they all say, well, we'll just stay on for another year, you know, because the parents want to keep it there. It's a different school district. They have a high population of Mennonite families who are very family-oriented, and they're very interested in what their children are doing. And, you know, it's a different, they have a different ball game than what other schools have. They don't have the problems like rugby has at school. So, and I guess there must be a lot of good things about it. I don't know, you know, I don't know in the long run, but their kids that have gone on to college have all done well, you know. They've learned how to study, and they've learned how to, you know, to be self-sufficient. So, I don't know what's the best. But they used to say when I started college, close those rural schools, you know, get those rural schools closed, and they'd get a much better education. The last year I was teaching, they said that was the best education children could get. It was a family-like situation, children helping each other. So, gone full circle.
What was your hardest childhood memory?
My hardest what?
Childhood memory.
Hardest? Toughest?
Most stressful, yeah.
Childhood? I had a very sheltered childhood, and I didn't lose any relatives. My grandparents lived, all of them, until, well, my grandpa that died of encephalitis. I was in high school, you know, but he wasn't the one that I saw a lot, and so it wouldn't have been the impact that they're both my own, but the impact that my grandpa Brick had for me, because I was there all the time. And so I didn't have, I know my folks went through tough times, but they always kept us kind of sheltered from it, you know. We never had a lot of money, and we never had no money. You know, it was always in between somewhere. And pretty on a keel with all the friends. When we didn't have any money, if we didn't get a crop, nobody else around did either. So I really didn't have, thank God I didn't have any illnesses. I never was in a hospital till I had my tonsils out, and I was in college then. So I had a surgical operation in a hospital. I've never had that to go through. I had good health. I don't know. I just didn't have bad times, I guess.
Okay. Well,
that
then
I can
what was
think
your
of.
happiest?
The happiest? Oh, I suppose special days like my wedding and, like I said, First Holy Communion, confirmation, those days, special days. And graduation day, a new day going out. And a chance to go to college. You know, I'm glad I had that chance. I don't know, I guess I had a pretty normal life, just, you know. Not, thank God I didn't lose a parent young, like a lot of kids do. That stuff. Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about your wedding?
Oh, we had a small wedding, kind of small. I had, when I was living in Minot one summer in a house, there were 8 girls upstairs in that house, and then 2 women lived downstairs. One had lost her husband. The other one never did marry. We were all going to summer school. And, a bunch of us were sitting in the kitchen, which was right near the basement, or the downstairs door. And I made the remark, I was sitting on the chair in a big mouth, and I said, I'm not going to go through a big wedding, go get married in white. I'm just going to take off and get married somewhere. And the door opened down, and they never associated with us, those 2. They came by themselves, and they stayed pretty much by themselves. And that woman came tearing up. Yes, you are. You can only have one wedding. She hasn't been around now. How many weddings have some of them had, and all white weddings, She said, you only have that one chance once, and you better have it. So I did have a white wedding, and it was a simple wedding. We had just 2 attendants and a little ring bearer and a little flower girl. And we were married in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning. And my sister's mother-in-law, I should say. She wasn't the mother-in-law then, but she, was part of the family because they were going together, going to be married. And she had done a lot of work. She was a very active woman in Devil's Lake. She was into everything, president of the PTA. She was in all of Daughters of the Revolution, the whole bit. And she knew just what to have. Well, we had fried chicken. We had a regular dinner. She had wanted us to have creamed chicken on biscuits, and my dad said, no way. We're going to have dinner, not creamed chicken on biscuits. So we had chicken and mashed potatoes. We had regular dinner. And then we left, Joe and I left about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And we went to Minneapolis for a week. We were gone a week. But I was happy because Minot schools had a policy. If you took off for something you wanted to do, not because you were ill or for illness, they took out your full paycheck. And then they paid the sub very little. And I expected that they'd take out my whole, 1/4 of my check. I was gone 1/4 of the month. I got back and they didn't. They gave it to me. They said, no, that's all right, that I could keep it just as a wedding. Didn't get that often in the Minot system, not with their school board. I can see it in a local district where everybody knows you, But anyhow, I lucked out on that one. I got my whole check. But we were gone a week, and then we came back, and then we lived in Minot. I finished out the year, and Joe worked for Sears that year and the next year. And then I quit, stayed home, and had my children. And I didn't go back teaching. I subbed occasionally. And sometimes there was a man over here that I told you about that lived at Wishick, an ag teacher. He tried making it farming, and he just couldn't get started, just couldn't make it go. And he had debts and bills and little children. And I didn't even take the paycheck. I just said, let him have it, he needs it worse than I do. So, I mean, I never did. I went in to only help out. I mean, it was never something I wanted to do. And I taught the interim years, and when I retired, I walked out, and that was it. I said, I'm never coming back in, and I never have. I've never gone back into a classroom. It's harder to handle kids. If you're their regular teacher, they're responsible to you, and you're responsible to them. If you're a sub, they know you're only in there for a day, and they're goofing off, and so I just didn't want to go through that. I know the first years after I retired, that might have been fun because I still knew all the kids. Now to walk in, I wouldn't know anybody anymore, and my daughter tells me I wouldn't even know how to start teaching anymore. She said, it has changed so much since this last child, No Child Left Behind Act. They don't have the textbooks they used to have. It's more or less pulling information from different places, and a lot of it computer. So I had thought, if we were living in town, I would like being a grandmother at a school. I've seen where a lot of women do that. They go in and read with the children, or the children read to you, and bring them projects, do projects with them. That would be fun, just to get the good side of it. And that's what these girls that retired this spring said, that's what they wanted to do. Some of them were going to sub, but a lot of them said they just wanted to come in and do the fun things and let somebody else go through the hassle. It's so much paperwork, just like what you said. They spend more time doing paperwork than they do teaching. That's not good. That's not what they're paid for. It's not helping kids. So I don't know if we'll ever get all that paperwork out of everything. Bad enough on the farm. Still have my folks' farm, my sister and I, down at Devil's Lake. And we put it all in the CRP and to try to keep that straight. No, I wouldn't want to. Don't like that kind of stuff.
Well, why do you think it's important to tell your life story?
I hope some parts of it can be used as background for a lot of children that probably don't have information on backgrounds and how things were and how they've changed. Some for the good, some not for the good. I hope that that's what it's, it can be used for.
Then, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think we've covered everything.
All right, then. Thank you so much for doing this.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming, both of you.